25-year-old Anne Moriah Wilson, or Mo as she was known to her friends, was a professional cyclist who primarily focused on gravel courses. Her passion for cycling began at a young age, and her journey to being a professional started in 2019, shortly after she graduated college and moved to San Francisco, California. Having been raised in a family of athletes, Moriah was extremely competitive and pushed herself to the limits in everything she did. Not only was she a gifted athlete, but she had the intelligence to back it up, gaining an engineering degree from Dartmouth College. After graduation, she took a job working for a bike company called Specialized. This allowed her to still be adjacent to the cycling world while giving herself some time to ease into actual competition. She was also kind of hedging her bets. She always wanted to make a career out of cycling and had trained most of her life for it, but deep down wasn't quite sure if she was talented enough to actually do it. The job at Specialized allowed her to train for competition and race while simultaneously working a full-time job to support herself. In 2021, she became friends with another cyclist by the name of Colin Strickland. The two met at an event called Rebecca's Private Idaho. At the race, Moriah performed admirably and likely would have come in first had it not been for a few rookie mistakes made during the course of the race. Throughout the event, Strickland and Wilson began chatting with one another, with the 34-year-old Colin offering Mo a bit of friendly advice. This advice led to drinks at a restaurant where the two discussed things such as cycling techniques and bikes. It's easy to see all this and imagine that Colin's interest in Moriah from the start went beyond just trying to help out a fellow cyclist. However, both Wilson and Strickland were in a relationship at the time, with Wilson dating her college sweetheart and Colin living with his girlfriend, a woman named Caitlin Armstrong. Armstrong was a realtor and licensed yoga instructor who began dating Strickland in 2019. The couple was a terrible fit, to put it bluntly. They had nothing in common, and it seems the attraction was primarily a physical one. Colin, who reportedly had a habit of talking down to people, often chose Caitlin as his prime target. He frequently belittled her and would talk bad about her around their friends, saying on several occasions that he wanted to break up with her, but always stopped short of actually doing it. Caitlin, on the other hand, was desperate to find a man to settle down with, and despite her friends not thinking too highly of Colin, she absolutely did, even telling them that if Colin ever seriously dated someone else, she would, quote, murder them. A month after first meeting Moriah in Idaho, Colin ran into her again at an event called the Big Sugar Classic, which takes place in Bentonville, Arkansas. Caitlin came with him this time, hoping to join Colin and the other cyclists on a long group ride that went through some of the Big Sugar course. However, Colin declined to invite her, feeling as though she wasn't a good enough rider to keep up with the group, which included Moriah. Caitlin also noticed that Colin was particularly interested in mentoring Wilson specifically, and that the two seemed to be rather friendly with one another. On their way back home to Austin, Texas, the couple got into a heated argument, which led to them breaking up and Colin agreeing to move out. A couple weeks later, Colin received an Instagram message from Moriah that she was coming to Austin for a cycling event and was hoping to meet up. She informed Colin that she had also recently broken up with her boyfriend, meaning both cyclists were now single. Wilson stayed in Austin for about 2 weeks, during which time she and Colin engaged in a very open romantic fling. Strickland and Moriah's relationship ended as quickly as it began, when she left Austin at the beginning of November 2021. So it really ended up being more of a fling than an actual relationship, and just a few months later, Colin and Caitlin reconciled, then officially began dating again in January 2022. One of the stipulations Armstrong had when she and Colin got back together was that he would cease all contact with Moriah and any other of the young women he'd offered his mentorship to in the past, going so far as to send text messages to Moriah directly, warning her to stay away from Colin. Strickland didn't think it was fair he was being forced to end his friendship, though, so instead of ceasing contact, he simply kept her in his phone under a different name, and the two continued to speak to one another. As they say, though, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, particularly one with very serious attachment issues, who is willing to use violence. In January 2022, Strickland purchased 2 handguns for himself and Caitlin to be used as protection for their home. As Texas is an open carry state, it isn't uncommon for citizens to carry a gun on them either. So of course Caitlin getting one didn't strike anybody as odd. However, Armstrong did express to several friends that she believed Colin and Moriah were still seeing each other behind her back, and again reiterated that she would kill any woman who tried taking Colin away from her. For Moriah Wilson, 2022 started off with great success, as she won multiple events and finally made the decision to go full-time as a cyclist and leave her job at Specialized. The last race she ever competed in was the 2022 Sea Otter Classic, which she won handily in April. Her next race was set to be the Gravel Locos, which takes place in Hico, Texas, just northwest of Austin. On May 10th, she arrived in Austin where she was going to stay at a friend's house for the weekend. The next day, on May 11th, she once again met up with Colin Strickland. The two went swimming at a local pool around 6 p.m. and then went out for food right after, with Colin's explanation to Caitlin being that he was going out to run some errands. Shortly after 8 p.m., Colin dropped Moriah off at a friend's house where she was staying the weekend. A few hours later, Moriah's friend arrived home and made a horrific discovery. The 25-year-old cyclist lay dead in her friend's bathroom, shot twice in the head and once in the chest. There didn't seem to be much of a sign of struggle, and everything pointed to Wilson having been ambushed by her killer. Police arrived on scene where they recovered shell casings and Moriah's phone, which contained texts from Colin, and revealed the love triangle to investigators. They were also able to find a recording from a neighbor's surveillance camera, which showed a black SUV pull up to the home shortly after Strickland dropped Wilson off. A black SUV that very closely matched the description of Caitlin Armstrong's Jeep Cherokee. Austin police's luck continued when they realized they had an old arrest warrant for Caitlin from 2018 after she'd ran out of a local spa without paying for her Botox treatment. The following day, police brought both Colin and Caitlin in for questioning. Colin initially denied that he'd been with Wilson the day before, but quickly realized the detectives knew better. He confessed that he still maintained a friendship with her since their romantic fling, but insisted this was strictly platonic and that he hadn't gone inside the home after dropping her off. And while texts recovered from both their phones did make police question the whole platonic friendship thing, there wasn't any evidence suggesting Colin was lying about having gone inside. He also insisted that he didn't know anything about Caitlin being involved in the shooting, telling police that the two had spent a quiet evening together after he had gone back home. However, her interrogation left a different impression on police officers. They described her as very uncooperative and disinterested in what they had to say. When confronted with the video evidence of her SUV, Armstrong asked for the interview to be ended and refused to answer any more questions. Police anticipated this and hoped the old warrant they had would be enough to detain her. However, the warrant itself had the incorrect birthday, meaning it was essentially useless. Austin police had to quite literally let someone they believed was a murderer walk out of their front door due to a clerical error. Returning home, Colin and Caitlin spent the rest of the night lying in bed discussing what had transpired. Caitlin spoke at length about how much she missed her family and how she wanted to see them again. At one point, she started asking him how much trouble she was in, a question that kind of just went over Colin's head, as in his heart of hearts he didn't believe she'd had anything to do with Moriah's murder. The next morning, the two went to a coffee shop and had breakfast, after which Caitlin told Colin she was going to buy a new cell phone since hers had been confiscated. It was the last time the two would ever speak. Caitlin took her black SUV and traded it in at a local CarMax for $12,000 before boarding a flight to New York to pay her sister an unexpected visit. At some point during this visit, she stole her sister's passport and used it to fly to Costa Rica, where she spent $6,000 on extensive plastic surgery to hide her appearance and disappear from law enforcement. While Caitlin was busy with that, the police were able to secure a search warrant for her and Colin's home, where they discovered her handgun. Ballistic tests would eventually match this gun to the bullets found inside of Moriah Wilson's body. Additionally, police discovered lots of information from Caitlin and Colin's cell phones, which revealed Armstrong's previous threats against Moriah, as well as the fact that Colin was still seeing Moriah behind Caitlin's back. All evidence now pointed to Caitlin murdering Wilson in a jealous rage, and an arrest warrant was issued. The only problem was Caitlin had now fled the country. After interviewing her friends and the sister whose passport she'd stolen, police had narrowed down her location to a Costa Rican town called Santa Teresa, and came up with a clever plan to catch her. They put a fake job posting for a yoga instructor, hoping that Caitlin, who likely needed money by this point, would take the bait. Responding to the ad was a woman named Ari, who police felt bore a resemblance to Caitlin Armstrong, but initially weren't quite sure due to all the effort she'd gone through to cover up her identity. They eventually figured out Ari was in fact Caitlin, and she was arrested by U.S. Marshals on June 19, 2022, after 43 days on the run. She was returned to Texas, where she was scheduled to stand trial for first-degree murder on October 30, 2022. Not ready to be done with the dramatics quite yet, Caitlin managed to escape one more time just a couple weeks before her trial on October 12th. This time breaking free from an officer who was taking her to a medical appointment and leading police on a 15-minute foot chase before she was finally apprehended. Caitlin would eventually be found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 90 years in prison. Wilson's parents filed a civil suit against her as well, with the court eventually awarding them $15 million for Moriah's death. Ultimately, this deadly love triangle damaged the lives of everyone involved. Moriah obviously received the worst fate, having her life taken from her in such a senseless manner. Whatever your thoughts on the morality of being the quote-unquote other woman, I hardly think a 25-year-old deserves to lose her life over it. Caitlin Armstrong threw her life away for no reason at all, and will now spend the majority of her years in prison, as she won't be eligible for parole until she is in her 70s. Colin Strickland's reputation was completely destroyed. He lost several sponsorships and became a pariah within the cycling community. While Colin obviously wasn't responsible for his girlfriend's actions, many people felt he'd shown poor decision-making leading up to the tragic shooting. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one.